his voice low but cutting. "You should really stop embarrassing yourself. It's painful to watch." The humiliation was too much. I held it together long enough to step outside, but as soon as the door closed behind me, tears streamed down my face. Chapter 1: Legacy of Expectations. I was always told I was destined for greatness. As the daughter of Robert Carter, founder of Carter Corporation, my life was one of privilege and promise. Carter Corp, a leader in tech and innovation, was more than a company. It was my father's legacy, built on his unwavering determination. I grew up as his pride, learning every aspect of the business by his side. I believed success was inevitable, as certain as my father's presence. But everything shattered in an instant. It was supposed to be a simple dinner, a celebration of Carter Corp's latest milestone. I was preparing a toast when my phone rang. The voice on the other end trembled. "Miss Carter, it's your father. He suffered a stroke." I dropped my glass. Hours later, I stood in a sterile hospital room, realizing that the man who was my rock, my mentor, was gone. A week later, I sat at the head of the long conference table, my father's seat. The boardroom was a sea of hard, skeptical faces. As the new CEO, I felt the weight of my title and the impossible task of filling his shoes. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," I began, keeping my voice steady. "I understand your concerns, but Carter Corporation will not falter." A heavy silence filled the room before Mr. Collins, a senior board member, spoke, his tone biting. Assurances from someone with little experience. "The market isn't a playground, Miss Carter." Another member chimed in coldly. "This industry is unforgiving. Decisions require more than good intentions." The words stung, but I refused to show weakness. "I've worked alongside my father for years," I said, hands clenched under the table. "I won't let his legacy crumble." Their dissatisfaction was palpable. I felt the weight of their disdain as they whispered doubts. Alone and outnumbered, I struggled to keep my composure. Thomas, my father's trusted assistant, stood by me. His quiet support was a lifeline. "Miss Carter," he murmured, "Hayes Enterprises is already circling. Alexander Hayes won't hesitate to strike at any weakness. He's defeated us before." Alex Hayes. The name sent a chill through me. He was known for his ruthless efficiency and cold determination, a man who had seized market share from us with precision. I knew he was waiting for a sign of fragility. "I won't give him the satisfaction," I replied, masking my fear. Thomas nodded. "Be ready, Emily. This is a battle for your father's legacy." As the meeting ended, I remained seated, staring at the empty chair that once held my father's steady presence. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me. "Dad," I whispered to the silent room, "I won't let you down." Chapter 2: Clash of Titans. I stood tall in the grand hall of the city's conference center, my heart pounding in my chest. The air buzzed with tension and anticipation. This was no ordinary business meeting. It was a high-stakes bidding war, and every powerful corporation had sent their best to secure the lucrative government contract on the table. Winning this would mean a significant boost for Carter Corporation, and I needed that win more than ever. I adjusted my blazer, forcing my hands to stay steady. The board's skepticism and my father's looming legacy were like shadows I couldn't shake off. I had to prove myself here, not just to them, but to myself. I scanned the room, and that's when I saw him. Alexander Hayes. He stood at the opposite end of the hall, his tall frame exuding confidence. His dark eyes swept over the crowd, calculating and cold. His mere presence commanded attention, and for a moment I felt my breath catch. I reminded myself not to be intimidated. He was my rival, the man who had humiliated Carter Corp. More times than I cared to remember. Today would not be another loss. As the bidding commenced, I presented Carter Corporation's proposal with unwavering conviction. I outlined our innovative approach, our commitment to quality, and the proven track record of excellence we could bring to this partnership. I ended my presentation with a confident smile, meeting every gaze in the room. There was polite applause, but I caught a glimmer of amusement in Alex's eyes. He leaned back casually in his seat, as if this entire affair was beneath him. My jaw clenched. When it was his turn, Alex strode to the front with the effortless grace of someone who knew they'd already won. He tapped the microphone, a soft click echoing through the room, as if calling everyone's attention to the main event. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and dripping with charisma, "we've heard an admirable effort today from Carter Corp." He paused, eyes flicking briefly to me. "Truly admirable." The room tittered with faint laughter. I felt my stomach twist. "However," he continued, "in an industry driven by results, effort isn't always enough, is it? We need guarantees, precision, and most importantly, experience." He emphasized the last word, letting it hang in the air like a gauntlet thrown. "Hayes Enterprises doesn't just promise, we deliver, faster, better, and with results that speak for themselves." There was applause. Loud, genuine applause. I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks. My grip on the edge of the table tightened until my knuckles turned white. "And unlike some competitors," Alex added, feigning casualness but cutting with precision, "we don't gamble with untested ideas or throw darts at a board, hoping something will stick. We build legacies, not stories." The laughter was sharper this time, more pointed. A few executives nodded, their faces alight with approval. Others smirked, enjoying the show. I bit the inside of my cheek, refusing to let my frustration show. I locked eyes with him, willing myself not to back down. "I'm sure we all understand, Mr. Hayes, that innovation sometimes requires risk. It's how great companies, great leaders, are born." A flicker of something, maybe surprise, maybe amusement, crossed his face. "Of course, Miss Carter," he replied smoothly, tilting his head slightly. "But innovation without wisdom can lead to ruin. Surely you understand that better than most." Another ripple of laughter. The words stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Not here, not in front of everyone. As Alex walked back to his seat, he passed close enough to whisper, just loud enough for me to hear, "Nice try, Emily." "Don't get too comfortable, Alex," I shot back, my voice low but firm. "Even giants fall." He paused, a mocking smile tugging at his lips. "Is that a promise, or wishful thinking?" He walked away without waiting for a response, his back as unyielding as steel. The murmurs continued around me. I caught a few snickers, a shake of the head, and even a hushed, "Too young for this game." My vision blurred for a second, but I willed myself to breathe, to focus. I had been underestimated before. They would all see. Thomas, my father's old assistant, approached me, his eyes kind but filled with concern. "Miss Carter, it's just one battle," he said softly, his voice a lifeline in a storm. "The war isn't over." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know, but he's right about one thing. I need to be better, stronger." "Alexander Hayes is ruthless, but he's not invincible," Thomas reminded me. "Use this, Emily. Turn their doubt into your fuel." Chapter 3. Pressure and Obsession. The days blurred together in a haze of meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. I threw myself into the work, trying desperately to claw Carter Corp back from the brink. My office became a war room, piles of papers and data scattered across every surface. Coffee had become my lifeline. Sleep? An afterthought. I was determined. I couldn't let them see me as weak, as a failure who couldn't carry her father's legacy. But determination doesn't always guarantee success. The first blow came when we lost a major supplier contract. I had worked tirelessly, convincing myself that securing this partnership would be the turning point for Carter Corp. I'd sat across from Mr. Lang, the CEO of our potential supplier, for hours, pitching ideas, making concessions, even swallowing my pride and asking for trust. When the rejection came, it was swift and brutal. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," Mr. Lang had said, his voice polite but firm. "But Hayes Enterprises offers terms we simply can't ignore. It's just business." Business. That word twisted like a knife. I walked out of the meeting with my head held high, but my chest felt hollow. I could almost hear Alexander's voice, dripping with mockery. Too young for this game. Days later, A new product launch, the culmination of months of development, fell apart at the 11th hour. Quality issues were flagged during final testing, and despite my desperate efforts to salvage it, the damage was done. Investors pulled back, wary of risking more on what they saw as a sinking ship. In the boardroom, I faced their cold, disappointed stares. The murmurs of doubt were louder now. They didn't have to say it. I knew what they were thinking. I wasn't my father. I wasn't enough. But the worst came when I tried to strike a deal with an international partner. A move that, if successful, could have opened up new markets for Carter Corp. I had spent weeks negotiating terms, putting together a proposal I was sure they couldn't refuse. But on the day of the final presentation, everything unraveled. As I walked into the sleek glass-walled boardroom, my heart pounded. The executives greeted me politely, but I noticed a familiar figure at the end of the table. Alexander Hayes. He leaned back in his chair, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. I should have known. He was already one step ahead. I pushed through my presentation, masking my nerves. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence. Then Alex spoke. "Well, that was ambitious, Miss Carter," he drawled, his voice like silk hiding a blade. "But I'm afraid it's a bit like bringing a dull knife to a gunfight." A few people chuckled, and my cheeks burned. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my composure. "Carter Corp offers proven value and long-term growth," I countered. "Unlike your risky ventures." Alex's eyes glinted with amusement. "Risks that pay off, as you can see," he said smoothly, gesturing to the documents in front of him. "I'm afraid you'll need more than a last-minute scramble to impress seasoned partners. Isn't that right?" The executives nodded, murmuring in agreement. I felt the ground slipping away. Alex stood, taking a few deliberate steps toward me. He leaned in just enough for only me to hear. "You're out of your depth, Emily. No amount of desperation will change that." I met his gaze, refusing to flinch, but my vision blurred. "You don't know me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Oh, I know enough." He straightened, addressing the room with a cold smile. "This meeting is over. Hayes Enterprises is moving forward." Laughter rippled through the room as people stood and gathered their belongings. The rejection was crushing, but Alex wasn't done. As he passed me by, he paused, his voice low but cutting. "You should really stop embarrassing yourself. It's painful to watch." The humiliation was too much. I held it together long enough to step outside, but as soon as the door closed behind me, tears streamed down my face. I leaned against the wall, breathing hard, trying to steady myself. When I returned to my office that night, the weight of it all crushed me. The failures, the ridicule, the relentless pressure to prove myself. It was suffocating. I sank into my chair, staring at the photograph of my father. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered, the tears coming again. Chapter 4. The Gamble. Desperation can make people do reckless things. I knew that better than anyone now. I'd spent weeks meeting in secret with Charles Decker, a man who promised salvation. He painted a picture of a grand partnership, resources, capital, strategies that would outmaneuver Alexander Hayes at every turn. Decker spoke with a confidence I was desperate to believe in. He was my lifeline when everything else seemed to be slipping through my fingers. I didn't hesitate. Carter Corporation had to come back stronger. I signed contracts, approved transfers, poured every remaining resource we had into this new venture. I could almost see the victory, the headlines, the regained respect, the vindication of my father's legacy. Then, everything unraveled. One cold morning, I arrived at the office to find chaos. Phones were ringing non-stop. Employees whispered anxiously in the halls. Thomas, pale and visibly shaken, burst into my office. "He's gone," Thomas said, breathless. "Decker is gone." I stared at him, the words not making sense. "What do you mean, gone?" "All of it, Emily," he continued, voice trembling. "The money, the assets we transferred, everything. He disappeared overnight. It's a scam." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of my desk, willing myself not to collapse. This can't be." "It's true," Thomas said grimly. "We've been completely drained." Panic clawed at my chest. Call the banks, the authorities. There must be a way to— There isn't, Thomas said, his voice breaking. He covered his tracks too well. We're finished. Finished. The word echoed in my mind like a death knell. Carter Corp was bleeding out, and it was my fault. I had gambled everything, and lost. The days that followed were a nightmare. Creditors hounded us relentlessly, threatening lawsuits and foreclosure. I tried to hold it together, but every moment was a reminder of my failure. I was haunted by the sight of employees packing up their desks, by the emails filled with disappointment and disbelief. I worked until exhaustion claimed me each night, only to wake up hours later in a cold sweat. One evening, after a particularly brutal day, I couldn't stand it any longer. I walked into a bar, a dark, noisy place where no one knew my name. I needed to forget, even if just for a few hours. The burn of alcohol was a welcome distraction. I downed one drink, then another, and another. The weight on my chest lifted slightly, the numbness creeping in. I laughed too loudly, spoke too freely. It was a pitiful attempt to escape reality. Another round, I slurred to the bartender, my vision blurring. Don't you think you've had enough? The voice was cold, familiar. I turned slowly, blinking to clear my eyes. There he was, Alexander Hayes. Of all people. He stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, they flickered with something close to pity? I hated it. Well, Alex said, his voice low but cutting. I never thought I'd see Emily Carter like this. A bar, drunk, pathetic. I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. Too pathetic then, I said, raising my glass in a mock toast. Alex stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. Is this your new strategy, Emily? He sneered. Drown your failures and hope they go away? Why are you here? I shot back, my words slurring slightly. Come to gloat? Watch the great Emily Carter crash and burn? He tilted his head, as if considering my question. I didn't think it would be this easy. Watching you self-destruct? A little disappointing, honestly. I slammed the glass down on the bar, the impact ringing out sharply. You don't know anything, Alex. Nothing. Oh, I know plenty, he replied, his voice softening, but only enough to twist the knife deeper. You put your faith in the wrong people, you gambled, and lost. The real world isn't kind to amateurs. That did it. The dam broke. Hot tears spilled down my cheeks, and I didn't care who saw. I stood shakily, my hands clenched. You think this is just business, don't you? Just another win for you. But it's my life, Alex. My father's legacy. I've tried everything. I've sacrificed everything. My voice cracked, but I kept going, the words tumbling out like an avalanche. Do you know what it's like to be haunted by the weight of someone else's expectations? To wake up every day knowing you're not enough? That every failure is a nail in the coffin of everything they worked for? He was silent. I could see the flicker of something in his eyes. Anger, pity, maybe even regret. But it wasn't enough to stop the torrent of words. I've worked myself to the bone, I continued, my voice shaking. I've tried to be strong, to hold it all together, and it's never enough. I've lost everything. So congratulations, Alex. You won. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, but they kept coming. My chest ached, every breath ragged. Are you happy now? I whispered, my voice raw. You've broken me. Is that what you wanted? Alex took a step closer, his expression no longer mocking. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. Emily, don't, I said, my voice barely audible. Don't pretend to care. I turned away, but the room spun. My legs gave out, and before I knew it, Alex was there, catching me. His arms were strong, steadying me as everything else crumbled. You don't get to do this, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. You don't get to be the one to catch me. He didn't respond. He simply held me as I sobbed, deep, heart-wrenching sobs that I had buried for too long. His grip tightened, and for a brief, maddening moment, I thought I felt him tremble too. You're stronger than this, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Even if you don't believe it right now. I pulled back just enough to see his face, searching for mockery and finding none. Why do you even care? His eyes met mine, and for a moment, there was no rivalry, no hatred, only something raw and unspoken. "Maybe I shouldn't," he said, almost to himself, "but I do." I opened my mouth to respond, but the exhaustion was too much. Darkness crept in, and I let it take me, collapsing into the warmth of his arms. I woke up in my bed, sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. Memories of the night before came rushing back. Alex had seen me at my worst, and he had brought me home. My heart clenched. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. Chapter 5. The Mysterious Savior. Then there was a knock at my door. Sharp, insistent. It was Thomas. He stepped in, his expression a mix of relief and urgency. "You need to see this," he said, handing me a stack of papers. I took them, my eyes scanning the contents. Bank statements, legal notices, all marked with red warnings. Until now. The red was gone. The debts. They were cleared. Every single one. My hands trembled. "How?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Thomas said, his voice low. "Someone paid them off. All of it." I sank into my chair, the weight of the news pressing down on me. "This has to be a mistake." "It's not," he insisted. "We verified it. Whoever did this wanted to remain anonymous." Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting, quickly replaced by suspicion. No one does something like this without expecting something in return. "Do we know anything? Any leads?" Thomas shook his head. "Nothing concrete, but whoever it is, they have deep pockets and even deeper motives." I stared at the papers, my mind racing. Someone had just saved Carter Corporation from total collapse. Why? I wasn't naive enough to believe it was an act of pure kindness. There had to be a catch. And the next few days were a blur. I kept myself busy, trying to stabilize the company, but my mind was constantly haunted by the question, who was my savior? What did they want from me? The unease gnawed at me, and no amount of work could make it go away. Then, on a gray afternoon, as I sat in my office, a courier delivered a sealed envelope. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding. Inside was a single note. "If you want answers, meet me at 2 p.m., the Glass House Cafe." Chapter 6. Face to Face. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow on the Glass House Cafe, its glass walls sparkling like crystal. I walked in, every step purposeful, every breath carefully controlled. My fitted suit exuded confidence, and the bright red blouse I wore felt like armor. Beneath it all, my heart raced. Whoever had saved Carter Corp wanted to meet, and I was determined to face them head-on. I scanned the cafe, searching for any sign of who I was supposed to meet. Then I saw him. Alex. The sight of him made my breath catch in my throat. Memories of the last time we'd met flooded back. Me, drunk and broken, spilling my heart out while he stood by, half amused, half something else. Heat crept up my neck. I wanted to forget that night, but seeing him here made it impossible. He noticed me immediately. His gaze swept over me with a hint of amusement, but there was something sharper underneath. I steeled myself and walked toward him, refusing to show any weakness. "Alex," I greeted, my voice cold. "Of all places, are you following me now?" He raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smug half-smile. Tempting idea, but no. He leaned back in his chair, exuding his usual confidence. "What brings you here, Emily?" I crossed my arms, determined not to let him get under my skin. "None of your business. But since fate clearly has a cruel sense of humor, where are you off to? Another scheme to crush your competitors?" He chuckled softly, a sound that grated on my nerves. "Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing." He gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Care to join me?" I rolled my eyes. "I'd rather not." Just as I turned to walk away, my heel caught on the hem of my skirt. Time seemed to slow. I stumbled forward, arms flailing, and before I could brace myself for impact, I felt strong hands catch me. The force of his grip pulled him forward too, and suddenly we were both falling. Alex twisted mid-fall, his arm cradling my head, shielding me from the impact as we hit the ground. For a breathless moment, everything went silent. My heart pounded, my face inches from his. I could feel the warmth of his breath, see every fleck of color in his eyes. His hand was still behind my head, protecting me. The closeness was dizzying, and for one wild moment, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The world around us seemed to disappear, leaving only the rapid beating of my heart and the intensity in his eyes. There was something raw, something real in the way he looked at me, something that made my breath hitch. Then my phone rang. The shrill sound shattered the silence between us. We both jolted, the moment crumbling like glass. Alex's eyes flickered, and he pulled away, helping me to my feet. The warmth of his touch lingered, even as I stepped back. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. "Yes?" I answered, my voice unsteady. It was Thomas. "Miss Carter, have you met him yet?" My gaze darted back to Alex, who was now straightening his jacket, his expression guarded once more. "Not exactly," I said, my words heavy with unspoken tension. "Actually," Thomas continued, sounding hesitant, "I think you have. Your savior. It's Alexander Hayes." Chapter 7. Beneath the Mask. Life has a strange way of weaving paths together, even when you'd rather they stay apart. I kept telling myself that Alexander Hayes was nothing but a rival, someone I could never trust. But no matter how hard I tried to distance myself, life had other plans. A series of unexpected events forced me to cross paths with him again and again. It started with subtle gestures, things I only found out through whispers and quiet acknowledgments from others. When an aggressive competitor tried to undermine Carter Corp, Alex was the one who intervened, blocking their moves through channels I couldn't touch. No one else knew, but I did. Confronting him about it only led to more frustration. "You're meddling again," I told him one evening, cornering him after a tense meeting. "I didn't ask for your help." He shrugged, his expression as unreadable as ever. "I know." "Then why?" I demanded, crossing my arms over my chest. "What do you gain from this?" He leaned in, just enough to make my heart skip a beat. "Maybe I don't like seeing others try to break what's already mine to battle." I scoffed, but the words lingered. His tone was cool, detached, but there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes, something I wasn't ready to confront. On the anniversary of my father's death, the weight of everything came crashing down. I went to his grave alone, the cold wind biting through my coat. I knelt by the headstone, tracing the engraved letters of his name. "Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I'm doing this right. I'm trying so hard, but I wish you were here. I need you." Tears blurred my vision as I bowed my head. I felt so small, so lost. Then suddenly warmth, a hand on my shoulder. I looked up, startled. It was Alex. He didn't say anything, just knelt beside me, his presence grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. I wanted to push him away, to tell him this was none of his business, but I couldn't. Instead, I let the silence speak for us. After a while, he stood and offered me his hand. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's walk." I hesitated but took his hand, letting him pull me to my feet. We walked slowly through the cemetery paths, the air heavy with memories and unspoken words. The sky was a soft blue, the sun dipping lower as the day stretched on. "I don't talk about my family often," Alex said, breaking the silence. "But I lost someone too." I glanced at him, surprised. He rarely spoke about himself. "Who?" "My mother," he said quietly, his gaze distant. "She passed away when I was young. My father wasn't the same after that." "I'm sorry," I whispered, the sincerity in my voice surprising even me. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I think in some ways, we both carry more than we should." We walked in silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The barriers between us were slipping. I could feel it. The sky turned shades of pink and gold as the sun dipped lower, painting everything in a warm glow. It was beautiful. We stopped at the edge of the path, the horizon stretching out before us. I turned to him, my heart pounding. "Thank you for being here." His eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything else fell away. "I meant it when I said you're not alone," he said softly. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was him, maybe it was me, but suddenly, we were closer, and his hand was on my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear I didn't know had fallen. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as the last rays of sunlight kissed the sky, we leaned in, and our lips met. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it deepened, filled with all the things we couldn't say: fear, hope, longing. When we pulled away, I felt breathless, the world spinning around us. Chapter 8. Unity and Love. 1 year later, the merger of Carter Corp and Hayes Enterprises had been finalized with a stroke of a pen, creating a powerful new entity that defied the odds. I stood in the garden of the estate, the sun warm on my face and the soft murmur of guests around me. Flowers bloomed in every color, the air filled with the scent of roses and jasmine. My heart raced as I adjusted the lace of my wedding gown. I was nervous, but not because I doubted him. I was nervous because it felt too good to be true, like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Thomas peeked his head in, smiling warmly. "It's time," he said. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Okay." The music swelled as I walked down the aisle. My eyes found Alex immediately. He stood at the end, waiting for me, his gaze steady and filled with something I could only describe as devotion. He looked handsome in his suit, but it was the way he looked at me that made my breath catch. When I reached him, he took my hand, his touch grounding me. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "And you're not so bad yourself," I teased, my voice trembling slightly. The officiant spoke, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. When it was time for our vows, I turned to him, my hands in his. "I never thought we'd end up here," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I'm grateful for every moment that brought us together, even the ones I hated at the time." Alex smiled, his eyes softening. "I know, and I never imagined I'd stand here either, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I promise to stand by you," I said, my voice steadying. "In every battle, in every victory, as your partner, in business, in life, in everything. And I promise to protect you," he said, his voice firm, "to challenge you, to annoy you, and to love you, always." Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't care. When we exchanged rings, it felt like a promise of something far greater than either of us alone, a future we'd build together. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said, but Alex was already leaning in. The kiss was soft, slow, and filled with everything we'd been through: pain, healing, and hope. The crowd cheered, but in that moment, it was just us.